Hey, what's going on, everyone? Mike Stedman coming to you live from Newark, New Jersey, here in my apartment. Many of you out there know me as the founder of Ironbound Boxing. But what a lot of you all might not know about me is for the last few years, I've been pursuing my master's in American Studies from Rutgers, Newark. And recently, I just finished up my thesis paper, went ahead and submitted it. So I'm all set to finish my master's program. And one of the reasons I want to shoot a video for you all is in the process of discussing my thesis paper, which was Booker T. Washington and the public historians, how public historians can inspire, inform, and sustain Black entrepreneurship in the digital age. I had a great conversation with my brother from another, Mike Lloyd. Many of you know I'm out there as the founder of Dope Coffee, which is an Atlanta-based e-commerce brand committed to putting Black culture in the coffee industry and in the coffee space. And just talking to him about my thesis paper and some of the research I uncovered, I really just felt like this was just a great opportunity to discuss some of this history through the Dope Coffee platform. I love my platform with Ironbound Boxing, all the things we're doing around health and wellness. But when I think about thought-provoking and engaging dialogue for the culture, I mean, what better than Dope Coffee and the movement that we're building with that? Even with that, right? I have the opportunity to be an advisor with the team out of Atlanta, and then also help them with some brand strategy work and whatnot. And I just wanted to take a moment and reflect on my experience writing my thesis and some of the research I uncovered that really speaks to what we're trying to do with this Dope Coffee movement, which is, really start to have ourselves reflected in business and in culture, and, having brands that seek to elevate Black culture, And, my thesis paper was essentially talking about, how, contrary to popular opinion, African Americans in this country have a long history of entrepreneurship. Unfortunately, a lot of the stories aren't told, right? So entrepreneurs like myself and Mike, we jump into this entrepreneurial hustle, we jump into this entrepreneur fray. We're told about all the statistics that hold us back, lack of access to capital, poor management skills, lack of a business education, business acumen. And what we realized was when I was doing my research, man, you realize that if you were starting a business now versus starting a business right after Reconstruction, many of the early Black founders in this country experienced the same thing, and not a lot of stuff has changed, right? But one interesting things about looking back at that history is I just found it really, really empowering to just learn about Black entrepreneurs in the early age. Obviously we know some big names like Booker T. Washington, who founded the Tuskegee Institute, and Madam C.J. Walker, who was one of the first Black female millionaires in this country. But when you look at, some of the challenges that we're up against currently, and some of the challenges that have kind of like always been there, despite it all, we have a long history of success within business. And I think one of the challenges that we have as a people and as a culture is a lot of times we try to compare ourselves to others, right? And so a lot of the metrics that are used to compare, minority businesses, particularly Black-owned businesses, and measure them as like underperforming compared to businesses from more affluent groups, it's not equal, right? It's not the same. I know a lot of people want to talk about, we should be past slavery at this point and, past the Jim Crow era and civil rights. But again, you start to look at the history. I don't think people realize just the effect of, slavery in this country and how we've had so many Black people working for years, working to make other people wealthy, essentially, because all the labor that was, all of our labor from our time in slavery, none of that wealth was going back to the Black community. And then you kind of think about when we come out of slavery, we weren't able to get access to capital. We had Black banks, but again, when you think about Reconstruction and you think about the violence in the South at the time, even that movement had its issues. One of the things I uncovered during my research that I found was very interesting. I want to say before the before the Great Depression of the 1930s, we went from, I want to say, quite a few hundred Black banks in this country that were cutting small business loans, supporting Black families, to just 12, right? And you want to think about how devastating that had to be. I don't know if Black culture has really ever recovered from such devastating losses. And another thing you kind of think about was, even during the Great Depression, right now, I want to say the median household income of the average Black family in America is around $30,000 or so. But in the Great Depression, the median household income was $1,000. So, I mean, that's crazy when you think about it, right? So many of our people and our culture lost so much money during that time. All these financial disasters that hurt the economy, the American economy as a whole, is twice as devastating on the Black economy, right? So when you kind of start to put stuff into perspective and you start to look at like the lack of access to capital and the challenges we face in this country, it really makes you take a different look at the Black entrepreneur experience in this country. And it begs the question, should we have a different approach with regards to entrepreneurship? And what do I mean by that? I'm talking about like even the just group cooperation, the group economy, right? Like what we're doing with Dope Coffee, right? Mike and his team down in Atlanta, that's my brother. We served together in Afghanistan. Like we don't have much, but we're able to support each other and work with each other to uplift each other's businesses. I have a background in history and, I'm working in some digital media stuff. And so being able to leverage these skills and these resources to support his team. And in the areas I'm weak at, he's able to help cover down on some of that stuff. And so when you think about the practices of, what does it look like when you're having a startup or a small business with limited access to capital, how do you maneuver in that space? I think it begs the question is, we just have a different experience. And I think we require different strategies with regards to entrepreneurship and starting businesses. And one way we can learn more about these different strategies is by looking at our history and looking at some of the entrepreneurs, some of the Black entrepreneurs that came before us. Again, Booker T. Washington, A.G. Gaston. Again, I mentioned Madam C.J. Walker before. They had unique strategies and approaches that were able to build successful businesses in their areas. And I'm curious to see if a lot of those strategies work here today. So that was really the basis of my thesis. And, one of the things I want to do is I want to put more of us in media content around entrepreneurship and around business. As I look at the entrepreneurial landscape out there, I just don't see us reflected in a lot of content and a lot of literature, especially business literature. I think we have a lot of stories, inspiring stories about how we started our businesses and, how we became the people we became today. But particularly, I see a lack of content and a lack of books about tools that Black entrepreneurs can benefit from, such as, it's all nice. Like I'm a big fan of the lean startup methodology. I study a lot of entrepreneurship books that focus on big tech. But I think if you're out there and you're trying to start a local barbershop, right? What literature do you pick up that really speaks to you? What literature do we pick up where we see ourselves in the culture, when we see ourselves in the tech, when I can read a book and say, hey, I feel reflected. I feel like that book is really speaking to me and my soul. I don't think that we have a lot of that out there. And so, one of the things I'm looking to do on my end in the future is just to create some more intellectual property content like this, where I can discuss, different projects I'm working on, my different thoughts and opinions about stuff. And, again, when I think about when you're having these intellectual conversations, when you're thinking outside the box, that's why I like the Dope Coffee brand, because, this is a conversation I would just love to have with a friend or with my boy Mike over a cup of dope coffee where we're chopping it up and we're talking about, race, business, and culture and, how it all intertwines. So, again, thinking back on my thesis, it was fun to write. It was interesting to dive into the history. When I started my master's program, I was literally almost done, but then I left my full-time job to focus on Ironbound Boxing full-time. And, between starting a for-profit and a nonprofit, the last thing I wanted to do was write that thesis paper. But I decided to gut it out a few weeks ago, wrote it, and submitted it, and came out all nice and good. So, hey, appreciate you all tuning in. Appreciate all the support you push my way. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and follow my boy Mike over at Real Dope Coffee on Instagram. Be sure to follow us at Ironbound Boxing. Peace and love.